What is this thing we call the mind, when the body lies breathless, when the heart gives up its rhythm, when the eyes no longer search the sky? Where does the light go when the lamp is shattered? This is the great question that has haunted the edges of every human thought since the first flame flickered in a cave. And the Buddha, seated beneath the Bodhi tree, did not turn away from this question. He walked into the heart of death, not with fear, but with awakening. The Buddha taught that what we call the self is but a dance of conditions, not a thing, not a soul, not a substance, just a flowing. The mind is not owned. It is not a possession. It is a river of consciousness, moving moment to moment, shaped by causes and conditions, without a fixed center. And when the body ceases to function, this stream does not abruptly end. It continues, carried by the force of craving, by the seeds of karma, by the momentum of all we have thought, spoken, and done. He said, mind precedes all things. Mind is their chief, they are mind-made. When this body dissolves, it is not the end of the mind, but a transformation, like a flame passed from one candle to another, not the same, not different. Consciousness finds new form, driven by the residual energy of volition, not rebirth as someone, but as something still caught in the great wheel unless insight has broken the chain. Do not imagine death as a doorway into silence. Imagine it instead as wind stirring the leaves of a tree, not yet fallen. The thoughts, emotions, tendencies we cultivate, they do not vanish. They become the architects of the next becoming. This is not metaphor. This is the turning of dependent origination. Avijja, pakaya, sankhara, ignorance, conditions, formations condition, consciousness. And so the cycle begins again. Anathapindika, the great benefactor of the Sangha, lay dying. His breath was shallow, his sight dim, and yet when Sariputta, foremost in wisdom, came to offer him guidance, Anathapindika wept, not from fear, but from reverence. He was not attached to his wealth, nor to his body. He wept because the Dhamma had been given to him in its deepest form, and he saw clearly that the mind is not confined to the shell of flesh. Let there be no clinging to the body, nor to perception, nor to formations, nor to consciousness, Sariputta said, and Anathapindika, with tears streaming, passed beyond with awareness, not delusion. We carry death within us like a shadow. But the Buddha would say, see the shadow clearly, and it can no longer bind you. To know the nature of mind is to no longer fear its passing. To see that the aggregates form, feeling, perception, formations, consciousness are not self, is to begin walking toward liberation. They arise and pass away. They are not I, not mine, not me. The fear of death arises only when we mistake the wave for the ocean. In deep meditation, a practitioner begins to see how each moment of consciousness arises due to conditions and passes when those conditions fade. It is not a continuous thread, but flashes of awareness, one moment giving rise to the next, like a spark leaping to dry grass. What continues after death is not the self, but the habit energy, the accumulated tendencies, the unresolved craving. And this is what takes form again. Angulimala, the feared murderer, transformed by a single encounter with the Buddha, did not carry his evil into his next life. He awakened in this very life. Why? Because karma is not a prison, it is a seed. And a seed can be burned by wisdom. Even a man with blood on his hands can enter the stream of liberation if he uproots ignorance and sees clearly. The mind that dies with insight dies free. But the ordinary mind, the mind untrained, dies confused. It grasps, It clings, it fears, and this fear becomes the engine of rebirth. Like a dreamer caught in a cycle of nightmares, it spins from one life to the next, not knowing it is dreaming. But when awareness dawns, when the mind sees the mind, there is a stillness that comes. Not an end, but a liberation. The Buddha called this nibbana, unbinding. The Tibetan masters speak of the bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth. And though Theravada texts are more restrained, they agree, consciousness does not wait. The last thought conditions the next arising. That is why the moment of death is sacred. It is the final expression of a lifetime of cultivation. If one has lived with mindfulness, one may die with clarity, and that clarity is more powerful than 1,000 rituals. Said Angulimala said, "You have no control over death, but you have control over how you live, and that determines how you die. Every breath is a rehearsal for the final breath. Every letting go is a preparation for the great letting go." And so the practitioner watches the breath, watches the thoughts, watches the clinging, and lets go again and again, until one day the letting go is complete. Mahakassapa, heir to the Buddha's robe and bowl, entered a deep state of meditation at the end of his life. It is said he passed into a cave in the mountains, seated in full lotus, and remains in deep absorption even now, untouched by decay. This is not fantasy. This is the power of a mind, utterly trained, utterly free. A mind that does not die in the way we imagine. A mind that dissolves without residue. To fear death is to fear change. But Buddhism teaches that everything is change. The lotus blooms only because the mud was broken, and the mind, when it dies to delusion, is reborn, not in another body but in truth. That is the great journey, not from one life to the next, but from ignorance to wisdom, from bondage to release, from self to no self, from samsara to nibbana. When the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, unmoved by Mara's illusions, he did not conquer death by escaping it. He conquered it by seeing through it. The fearsome specter of impermanence that grips the heart of the world became, in his gaze, a doorway. Death was no longer an end, but a veil thin, permeable, trembling in the wind of wisdom. And what lies beyond that veil is not a promised heaven or a wrathful hell, but the undying nature of awareness itself, when it is no longer bound by craving. He taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. All conditioned things are unsatisfactory. All things are not self. These three marks, anicca, dukkha, anatta, are not merely ideas to be memorized. They are truths to be lived, breathed, and known in the marrow. For the one who sees them, deeply and without resistance, death holds no dominion. The clinging mind trembles. The free mind smiles. What is it that dies? The body, certainly. The sensations, warmth, pain, touch, fade like smoke. The perceptions grow dim. The mental formations lose their structure. Even consciousness, what we think of as the enduring spark, ceases when its conditions are exhausted. But the momentum of habit, the unfinished business of the heart, the stored intentions of the unawakened mind, these continue, unanchored to a self, yet moving like wind between trees, finding form again and again. This is how the wheel turns. Birth is followed by decay, joy by sorrow, union by parting. But in the center of the wheel, unmoved, is the still point of seeing. If we are caught in the outer rim, we spin, but if we return to the center, the place of bare awareness, we find freedom, even as the world turns. Consider the story of Queen Malika, the devoted wife of King Pasenadi. Though she lived in a palace adorned with jewels, She often turned inward, seeking refuge in the Dhamma. Upon her death, the king, grieving and restless, asked the Buddha where she had gone. The Buddha, with serene gaze, did not answer with sentiment, but with clarity. Her destination is not your concern, O king. Instead, look to your own mind. Cultivate merit. For death is certain. The time is uncertain. The master was not being cold. He was guiding the king toward the only path that leads beyond suffering. The path inward. The one who obsesses over the fate of others forgets their own fleeting breath. Better to live mindfully, moment by moment, than to grasp after visions of the afterlife. For the mind, when clouded by craving, creates its own hell, and the mind, when pure and still, opens into immeasurable peace. This is why the Buddha did not concern himself with metaphysical speculation. He was once asked, "Is the world eternal or not? Is the self the same after death or different?" He remained silent, not because he did not know, but because these questions do not lead to liberation. They bind us to thought, to concepts, to the very craving that prolongs the cycle. "I teach one thing," he said, "suffering and the end of suffering." Rebirth is not a doctrine to believe in. It is a process to observe. When we react to anger with more anger, we are reborn in that fire. When we respond to insult with compassion, we are reborn in peace. Every moment is a rebirth. Every act of mindfulness, a death to ignorance. This is the Dhamma, eternally available, intimately near. Even in the moment of dying, this truth shines. A bhikkhu once lay on his deathbed, trembling with fear. The Buddha visited him and asked, "What do you fear?" The monk replied, "I am afraid I will lose everything." The Buddha placed his hand gently and said, "Nothing ever belonged to you, let go." And in that letting go, the monk passed into peace. For those who cling to form, death is terror. For those who see through form, death is release. The Dhammapada whispers, "Just as a snake sheds its old skin, so the wise shed the body and walk free." But this freedom is not granted, it is earned, moment by moment in the furnace of awareness. We train the mind not to escape death, but to meet it as a friend, knowing it will take nothing we truly are. Think of the laywoman Visaha, one of the Buddha's foremost female supporters. She lost her beloved granddaughter and came to the Blessed One in tears. He asked, "Would you wish to have 100 grandchildren, each as lovely as she?" "Yes, Lord," she said. "Then know that with each comes the pain of loss," he replied. "The wise do not mourn what must perish. They love deeply, but they do not cling." Visaha bowed and dried her tears, not with resignation, but with understanding. To love without clinging is the highest form of love, and to die without fear is the highest form of life. These are not separate truths. They are one and the same. For when we cling to the illusion of permanence, we suffer twice. Once when we fear the end, and again when it comes. But when we see clearly that all is passing, we begin to live fully, fearlessly. In Vipassana, we learn to observe sensation with equanimity. Heat arises. Observe. It fades. Observe. Pain intensifies. Observe. It shifts. Observe. This training of the mind prepares us for death. For when the body begins to dissolve, the sensations will come with force. The breath will shorten. The muscles will tighten. The light will dim. But if the mind has been trained, it will not panic. It will watch. It will let go. And in that final moment, it may awaken. This is not a promise. It is a possibility. The Buddha never offered salvation as reward. He offered the path, and the tools, and the insight. But we must walk it. No God, no ritual, no belief can save us at the moment of death. Only our own mind, cultivated, disciplined, clear, can carry us across that threshold without drowning in fear. Even the arahant does not seek death, nor fear it. They simply greet it like an old friend returning after a long journey. They know that nothing ends, and nothing continues. It simply changes. The drop returns to the ocean. The flame merges with the sky. The mind, no longer bound, rests in the unconditioned. And so we are left with a choice not of when we die, for that is unknown, but of how we live and how we prepare. Not with clinging, not with despair, but with clarity, with compassion, with the courage to see things as they are, and not as we wish them to be. To understand what happens to the mind after death, we must first understand what happens to the mind before death, moment to moment. In every instant, the mind arises and passes away. Like waves on the ocean, no two moments of consciousness are the same. Yet because the waves appear continuous, we believe in permanence. We believe in a self. But the Buddha, with eyes like twin lotuses opening to the sun, saw otherwise. He saw that what we call I is merely the coming together of conditions, dissolving as swiftly as they arise. He likened the mind to a monkey swinging through the forest, grasping one branch, then another, never resting, never content. This monkey mind creates karma through its every motion, and karma in turn creates the next mind. Thus the cycle spins. But if the monkey grows still, if it learns to dwell in awareness, then the forest changes. The branches no longer beckon. The motion ceases. And in that stillness, the illusion of self is This is the art of dying before death. To let the self fall away while the body still lives. To taste emptiness, not as a void, but as peace beyond conditions. The Buddha called it sunyata, emptiness. Not nothingness, but freedom from the burden of identity. When we know this emptiness, we know that death does not take us. It simply takes what we never truly were. Bhikkhu Bodhi wrote, "To see with wisdom is to see through the veil of appearance, to the truths that liberate." And so the practitioner trains the mind like one polishes a mirror, not to create something new, but to reveal what has always been, the luminous, deathless quality of awareness itself. When that awareness is no longer entangled in form, it is said to be liberated. But how do we arrive there? Not by running from death, but by looking into its eyes. In the charnel grounds, where corpses were laid to rot, monks were instructed to sit and contemplate the stages of decay. Not as an act of morbid fascination, but of truth-seeing. This body too, they would say, is of the same nature, destined to break apart. And in that vision of decay, paradoxically, they found peace. For when the illusion of permanence is broken, attachment loosens, and the heart softens. One such monk, Bhikkhu Tissa, was proud of his beauty. But when illness consumed his flesh and sores appeared, he despaired. The Buddha visited him and asked, "Do you still see this body as worthy of pride?" Tissa wept and said, "No, Blessed One." The Buddha said, "Then you have begun to see." With that clarity, Tissa passed away, not in shame, but in freedom. The mind that meets death with craving is swept into new becoming. But the mind that meets death with mindfulness touches the edge of the unconditioned. It may not yet leap across, but it glimpses, and that glimpse can change everything. It can loosen the fetters, dissolve the fear, and prepare the heart for what lies beyond. This is why practice matters, not for the sake of achievement, but for the training of the mind to meet all things: birth, aging, sickness, death with equanimity. For what is death but the ultimate moment of change. And what is practice but learning to meet change with grace? In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha offers the 4 foundations of mindfulness: body, feeling, mind, and mental objects as a raft across the flood, not a doctrine to be clung to, but a way of anchoring the mind in presence. When we breathe in with awareness, we return. When we feel pain and observe it without reactivity, we grow in strength. When we see anger arising and do not fuel it, we are no longer slaves to karma. And karma, the great current that shapes our journey, is not punishment. It is pattern. It is cause and effect, written not by gods, but by every thought, every choice. It does not bind us. It simply reflects us. The angry mind finds angry realms. The generous heart finds joy. The awakened mind finds release. This is why the Buddha said, "By oneself is evil done. By oneself is one purified." There are stories of those who, in their final moments, remembered the Dhamma and were transformed, not by faith alone, but by insight. A slave once came to the Buddha, weary and frightened. He had stolen to survive, he had lied to protect himself, but in the presence of the Blessed One, he saw his suffering, not as punishment, but as consequence. He asked to take refuge. He was ordained, and when death came to him not long after, he died smiling, not because his life had been easy, but because his mind was free. This is the invitation to free the mind, not from death, but from delusion. For the deluded mind will cling, even as the breath leaves the body. It will grasp at sights, sounds, memories, hopes. It will spin through realms, hungry ghost, animal, human, celestial, never resting. But the mind that sees clearly will not grasp. It will rest in the knowing. And from that knowing, it may be born no more. We may ask, where will I go after death? But the Buddha would turn the question, where are you now? For if the mind is restless now, it will be restless then. If it is grasping now, it will grasp then. And if it is free now, it may remain free, regardless of what comes. The heart of Buddhist teaching is not about preparing for another life. It is about waking up in this one. For in this very moment we touch birth and death. With every breath, something ends. With every thought, something begins. The boundary between this life and the next is not a line, but a veil woven from the threads of intention. To live with mindfulness is to live at the edge of that veil. To train the mind to walk gently, see clearly, love deeply, and let go. And when death comes, it will find us not asleep, but awake. Not clinging, but resting. Not frightened, but ready. The river does not mourn its passing into the sea. When the final breath slips like a thread of silk from the body. When the eyes close not in sleep, but in surrender. When all that was clung to the name, the face, the memories dissolves into silence. What remains is not a void, but a question, not spoken in words, but felt like the hush after thunder. What am I truly? And the answer, whispered through every teaching of the Buddha, is this: you are not the body. You are not the story. You are not the name carved into stone. You are not what lives or dies. You are awareness, ever changing, ever free, if you remember. The ones who remember, who die without clinging, do not fall. They are not dragged by karma into another becoming. They do not take form again because there is nothing left to return. The fire has gone out, not in darkness, but in peace. The thirst has been quenched. The mind has come home. But even for those not yet free, there is hope, because every step toward mindfulness is a step toward deathlessness. Every act of compassion weakens the chain. Every moment of clarity, every breath, taken in full awareness, plants the seeds of liberation. Death is no longer a wall, but a mirror, reflecting back the quality of the mind. And so, when the body falls, and the breath ceases, and the senses withdraw, the only light that remains is the light we have tended within. If that light is strong, it will guide us. If it is clear, it will not flicker. And if it is free of fear, it will not be extinguished. Think of it not as the end, but as a silence after a song. Not an erasure, but a return. Not a loss, but a release. The Buddha's final words echo through time, tender and resolute. All conditioned things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence. And so we do. We sit. We breathe. We die before we die. And in doing so, we are never born again.